Today, we're diving into a story that's been unfolding for 2,500 years, a massive quest to understand the human mind. It's a tale packed with brilliant thinkers, totally radical ideas, and this relentless search for what makes us, well, us. So let's kick things off with two of the biggest questions of all.
I mean, think about it. The choice you made to watch this right now, was that really you choosing freely? Or was it just the end of a long chain of events that you're not even aware of? This whole puzzle, free will versus determinism, it's one of the core things psychologists have been wrestling with forever. And hey, what about who you are as a person? Your personality, how smart you are, your sense of humor, was all of that just baked into your DNA from day one? Or was it all shaped by your life, your family, your friends, nature or nurture? This isn't just some dusty old debate, It's a question about the very core of your identity. Now, for most of human history, questions this big belong to the philosophers. But something really interesting happened. The study of the mind took a huge leap, moving out of the world of pure speculation and into the world of science. And you can probably guess where our story begins. Ancient Greece. With the earliest psychologists we can point to, the philosophers Plato and his student, Aristotle. Now, obviously, they didn't have labs or brain scanners, but they had incredibly powerful minds, and they were really the first to try and tackle these big questions in a systematic way. And right out of the gate, they set up the debate we're still having today. Plato was on team nature. He thought all our knowledge is basically inborn. But Aristotle? He was team nurture. He said we're born as a tabula rasa, a total blank slate. And for 2,000 years, that's where the debate stayed, in philosophy, because they just didn't have the tools to actually test any of it. But then, the 1800s rolled around, and things started to change. Big time. The study of the mind moved from the philosopher's armchair right into the laboratory. This was the birth of psychology as a science. So let's meet the trailblazers. Over in Germany, you had Wilhelm Wundt, who set up the very first psychology lab ever. And in the US, you had William James, starting one at Harvard. These guys took those huge, abstract questions from philosophy and started asking, okay, but how can we measure this? How can we actually test it? And this new approach led to the first two competing schools of thought. Wundt's structuralism was all about breaking the mind down into its tiniest parts, kind of like how a chemist analyzes a chemical compound. Their method was introspection, basically asking people to describe in minute detail what they were experiencing. On the other side, you had James's functionalism. Inspired by Darwin, they didn't care so much about what the mind is, but why it does what it does. What's the purpose of consciousness?
Just think about that for a second. The ambition of these structuralists was absolutely huge. They literally wanted to create a periodic table for the mind, a complete map of the fundamental building blocks of every single thought and sensation.
Okay, so as we enter the 20th century, the game changes again. A couple of powerful new theories show up with wildly different ideas about the mind. One theory said the most important parts of your mind are totally hidden from you. In the other, it said we should just ignore the mind altogether.
And here are the titans who would define that debate. You had Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. And on the other side, the champions of a new idea called behaviorism, John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner.
Freud's big idea was, well, it was a bombshell. He said that the conscious mind, the part you're aware of, is just the tip of the iceberg. He believed the real drivers of our behavior, all our deepest fears, desires, and forgotten childhood traumas are buried deep in our unconscious mind, pulling the strings without us even knowing it. And then behaviorism came crashing in with a completely different take. They said, hold on, a real science can only study what you can see and measure. So things like the unconscious? They said that's not science. To them, the mind was a black box. You can see the stimuli that go in, and you can see the behavior that comes out. But what happens inside that box? They believed it was impossible to study scientifically, so we shouldn't even try.
So for decades, psychology was kind of dominated by this debate. But then, starting around the 1960s, a new movement came along. And it was armed with new technology and a really powerful new metaphor that dared to crack open that black box.
This was the cognitive revolution. And what powered it? Computers. All of a sudden, psychologists had this new model for the brain. They started seeing it as an information processor, just like a machine. They said, hey, we can study what's inside the black box. And they argued that you have to understand those mental processes, how we perceive things, how memory works, how we make judgments, if you ever want to truly understand behavior. The mind was back, front and center.
So, now that we have all these amazing new tools to actually look inside the brain,
we can go back to one of those huge questions we started with: what does modern science have to say about free will? And, well, the findings are pretty wild.
Check this out. Researchers put people into a brain scanner and gave them a super simple task. Just press one of two buttons whenever you feel the urge. All they had to do was remember which letter was on the screen at the exact moment they decided to press the button. The real goal was to see if their brain activity showed a decision before they were consciously aware of making one.
And the result? The scientists found patterns of activity in the brain that predicted which button the person was going to press a full 10 seconds before the person actually felt like they had made a choice.
Yeah, let that sink in for a minute. For a whole 10 seconds, your brain may have already decided what you're going to do before you are even aware of it. This just shows how complicated the whole idea of free will is. It suggests our feeling of making a choice might just be the very last step in a much longer, unconscious process. It really makes you question how much control we actually have, right?
But wait, it gets even more complex. Because our minds don't operate in a vacuum. Modern psychology knows that to really get the full picture of a person, you have to look at the social and cultural world they live in.
This social-cultural approach shows just how deep our background shapes us. For instance, in many Western cultures, the focus is heavily on individualism, valuing personal success, being independent. But in many East Asian cultures, the focus is more on collectivism, valuing group harmony and your duty to the people around you. And this isn't some small difference. It can change everything, from how you see yourself to how you interact with others.
So, after this whole quest, what are the big takeaways? We've seen psychology grow up, from its roots in ancient philosophy into a real science. We've seen these huge schools of thought battle it out over the mind itself. Should we explore its hidden depths or just ignore it? We saw the mind make this amazing comeback during the cognitive revolution. And finally, we see that today, to truly understand a person, you have to look at them, their brain, and their world.
And that brings us right back to the beginning. Back to you. So, are you a product of your unconscious drives? A bundle of learned behaviors? A super complex information processor? Or a reflection of your culture? The story of psychology tells us you're probably a mix of all of it. The real question is, how do all those different forces come together to make you, you?